Well, welcome to With All Due Respect, where we discuss theology and culture with grace and respect. I'm Megan Bowles-Dutoit, and
I'm Michael Jensen.
You know, Michael, I studied apologetics. This is going to date both of us at the turn of the century.
That expression is kind of dated.
Oh, yeah, true. At Morling College. When did you study?
Well, we studied a little bit at Moore College, but I think I've kind of been an amateur student of apologetics.
Oh, you didn't do a subject?
Not formally, no. We didn't. I then taught it, though. We had a first-year alternative diploma, which had apologetics, and I taught it.
Okay.
So you had
That's often the best way of learning to teach. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, when I was studying it at Morling, we studied all sorts of types of apologetics, so evidential, experiential, presuppositional, etc. But what we never talked about was cultural apologetics. And this term seems to have exploded onto the evangelical scene in recent years, and suddenly you feel like you've got to be across it, right?
Yes.
So I did a search for books being sold on it, and the first one I could find with it in the title was from 2019.
I think this is fascinating.
Yeah.
It's so recent.
Yes. Paul Gould. Then I did a Google Ngram search, so, you know, that looks at kind of like a database of the usage of terminology. It doesn't really take off in that until 2016. And then the Gospel Coalition launched the Keller Center for Cultural Apologetics in 2023. So it's so recent, but suddenly has a lot of, is prestige the right word, or
Well, I think
buzz?
we need to have an episode on this very issue.
Well, that's what we're going to do.
Really?
So we're going to talk about what should we be doing it? How should we be doing it? First on, we've got Sam Chan, a fellow at the Keller Center. He's going to come on and help us out. And then Mark and I are going to grapple with what we think about this concept. And are we doing it? Is what we're doing cultural apologetics? And we finish with some really important cultural texts, which are having a bit of a moment, these cultural texts.
Be our guest, opening up the conversation to others. Reverend Dr Sam Chan, a public evangelist and author who was born in Hong Kong, studied medicine in Sydney. I think I went to school with him, actually. We went to the same school at Trinity Grammar School as well.
Oh, there you go.
Then he got his theology.
This is now sounding like it's like jobs for the boys.
It is really. Then he got his theology PhD in Chicago. He's a public speaker for the City Bible Forum and Third Space. He's also the head trainer and mentor at EvQ School of Evangelism. Of relevance to our topic today, he's a fellow at the Keller Center for Cultural Apologetics and contributed to a recent book that's been edited by Colin Hanson with contributions from several Keller fellows. It's called The Gospel After Christendom, an introduction to cultural apologetics, and was a finalist in the latest Christianity Today Book Awards. Welcome to With All Due Respect, Sam Chan. I hasten to add that Sam Chan is one of the few men that I've ever seen play the recorder with his nose. It's great to have you, Sam. Is this true?
It is. I can play two recorders out, one up each nostril, one in melody and one in harmony.
A duet.
Yeah, I've seen it done. That it can be done doesn't mean it should be done, but that's not why we're here.
I love that. That's right. That's a David
recorders,
Hume divide between the is and the ought.
That's right. So there is a link to the subject of cultural apologetics there somewhere. But we're really glad to have you along With All Due Respect. We want to ask from the outset, though. You say evangelism today is not just about what is true, but about what is good and beautiful. So, how do you define cultural apologetics, and particularly in relation to that little saying, the true, the good, and the beautiful?
Yeah, so the true, good, beautiful can be traced back to maybe Aristotle's trilogy of reality. And one good way of looking at it would be, let's say back in the age of Christendom, the question that non-believers had would be, is Jesus true? Like, can I trust the Bible? How do I know if he rose from the dead? And the question that people might have had was, how can I get to heaven? So evangelism was asking people questions like, if you died tonight, where would you be? And people usually saw their mission in life was to be a good person. And maybe part of evangelism was to convince them that they weren't quite as good as they thought they were. You know, if you've broken one law in the Bible, you've broken all the laws in the Bible. But since we've moved into post-Christendom, the emphasis is more on, how do I know if Jesus is good or beautiful? Like, not how can I know if God exists, but how can I trust God if he exists? And maybe the question that people have right now is not how can I get to heaven, but how can I live a happy life? Like what do I have to do to be happy?
I think some evangelicals, and I've heard you in conversation with some of our brothers and sisters, find this shift very difficult, because when you start talking like this, they say, well, if you're not going to talk about the how to get to heaven or how to get forgiven question, then you're betraying the gospel. What would you say?
I guess there are many parts to the gospel message. There are many components. So maybe even in the New Testament, there are many components. Like maybe in Matthew's gospel, the question was, how can I be in God's kingdom? The question in John's gospel is, how can I get eternal life? The question in Paul's letters could be, how can I be justified? Or how can the Jew and the Gentile become one? So already we see the gospel answers many, many, many different cultural, existential, and emotional questions.
Would it be fair to say cultural apologetics might be seen as what people call pre-evangelism in a way?
Yeah, that's one way. So this is all coming out because a book called The Gospel After Christendom has just come out. And there are many authors doing many chapters, and everyone's got their own slight different take on what is cultural apologetics. Some would say, yes, it's a form of pre-evangelism. Like, how can I get them, like, wanting to hear the gospel before I tell them the gospel? But other people would point out, no, this has been part and parcel of evangelism all the way back to the Bible's time. Like, there's examples of it in Jesus, examples of it in the apostles.
So I wanted to ask, there's been a bit of perhaps pushback, especially in America, but also again here in Australia, against the so-called winsome evangelism, the idea that we have to be hospitable, gentle, or persuasive, and that somehow when we do that, we're capitulating to culture. So is this word winsome really working for? I mean, is it problematic to be hospitable, gentle, and persuasive? What do you think the critics are missing?
The word winsome, for me personally, has always been problematic. I've never heard the word before, never knew what it meant. Someone said you only understand it if you read Pride and Prejudice, and I haven't read Pride and Prejudice. So I grew up in the western suburbs on 1980s action movies with Chuck Norris. So I've never heard the word winsomeness.
You know what's so funny about this is for our cultural text that we're going to look at in this episode, we are actually looking at Jane Austen. So it's so intriguing to me that have you read any Jane Austen now?
No, but that's never stopped me trying to be an expert on something I don't know.
Right.
Like, I'm a medical doctor. We never admit we don't know what we're doing. We always come in pretending. Like, how long can I bluff? So I don't have the imposter syndrome. I have the bluffer syndrome. Like, how long can I keep this up?
But you're being very winsome about it.
So get back to winsome, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I guess winsomeness in and of itself can become an idol, because if all we're trying to do is accommodate as a Christian, then that can be an idol. But the opposite mistake is also an idol, where combativeness for combativeness' sake is also an idol. And some of us are guilty of that, where we look for a fight just for the sake of a fight. But we just have to look in the Bible and again see there's so many different approaches to evangelism. So you have Jesus. You know, he will confront, he will be combative, and there are examples of that where he goes through the temple with a whip. But there are other times where he's very gentle. Let's put it gentle, like to the woman at the well, he's very gentle. To the woman accused of adultery, he's again very gentle. So you can see there are different approaches here. And the apostles are very similar in the book of Acts. When they preach to the Jews, they're very combative. They say things like, yeah, well, you just crucified the Messiah. And they all go, well, what should we do? Well, you need to repent. So that's quite confrontational. But then to the pagan audiences, they're much more, well, they work with their culture. They work with them rather than against them. So if we want to be guilty of reductionism and oversimplifying things, it seems like Jesus and the apostles are combative to those who had the scriptures, those who went to the temple, those who should have known better. But to those who didn't have the scriptures, who weren't worshiping God yet, they were much more accommodating rather than combative.
On that note, so that kind of they didn't have the scriptures, that really describes a lot of what we are now dealing with, right? In that there's just not that scriptural knowledge.
We are so post-Christendom now. Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
Like even to mention a word like Abraham or Moses, people have no idea what we're talking about.
So how does that change the apologetic task then?
Yeah, just knowing that we're starting from a long, long way further back. So it's almost like we've gone pre-Christendom. So we had pre-Christendom where the people were unreached for the gospel. Then we've had Christendom where Christians had a seat at the table. That's how I want to describe it. Now we're post-Christendom. And it's almost like we're pre-Christendom again, but there's some slight differences because no one's ever truly a blank slate. And there are differences there. But it's interesting. I have a lot of missionary friends who evangelize in Asia where it's pre-Christendom. And I'm starting to see this is very similar to what my missionary friends in Asia have to do.
Now, you've written one of the essays in The Gospel After Christendom, this collection that's come out. And in that, you use Paul in Athens, right? This is sort of the classic moment when the apostle is addressing a pagan audience as opposed to a Jewish one. And you've got your 5 steps that you outline, and just in brief, they are observing. I wondered if you could remember them. Observing the cultural text, understanding the existential cry, empathizing with the cultural storyline, deconstructing the cultural storyline, and fulfilling the cultural storyline. Well, I just want to know how does that work in practice? Can you give us an example? For example, in your book, in your essay, you use standing at children's sport, taking the kids to sport on a Saturday. How does that work?
Yeah, so if I could just backtrack then. So back in the day when, the evangelism was trying to convince people that Jesus was true, part of it was we learned worldviews. There's a Christian worldview, but there are other worldviews. And it was very propositional. Like this is what other worldviews believe about God, or this is what other worldviews believe about death. And it was very propositional. But now I realize no one can ever articulate their own worldview back at you in propositions.
Yes.
We all have one.
Yeah.
Live it, we breathe it, but we don't know what we actually believe. So now that we're in post-Christendom, we talk more about cultural storylines rather than worldviews. So we all actually have an implicit mission that we're trying to achieve. We all have bad guys in our storyline that stop us achieving that mission. And we all have good guys that are going to help us achieve that mission. So part of it then is going into a culture like a missionary, like Paul in Athens, and just thinking, okay, what is this culture's storyline? What are they living by? What is their implied happy ever after ending? What is tragedy for them if they don't get it? Then what is good about this storyline? Because every person is in the image of God, because of God's common grace and general revelation, there will be something true, good, and beautiful in their storyline. So can I hear it? Can I articulate it back to them where they go, yes, that's my storyline, and then empathize it with them, so we feel the emotion, so we too can say something like, I too would want this to be true. So the example would be, most of us with kids sign our kids up for weekend sports. So we've done the same. We're Asians trying to raise our kids in Australia. All the Aussies have their kids in weekend sports. So we've done the same. And every parent does the same. You sign your kids up for weekend sport, you pay your money, and you hope it gets cancelled. Every Friday night, you keep praying for rain. It's the only thing that you pay your money for, and then you hope, you don't get your money's worth. But anyway, but why? So this is a storyline. We sign our kids up for weekend sport. It's a great inconvenience. It causes gridlock traffic on weekends. It costs us a lot of money. Why do we do this? What is our mission? Somehow we think this is good for our children. It'll give them social capital. It'll help them get ahead. This is their storyline. And it also has an implied meritocracy that in this life, to get ahead, you do have to be the strongest, the smartest, and the fittest. So then we can just hear it for what it is. Like we say, hey, look at us. So we describe it. Look at us. We have our kids doing Saturday sport. I understand for us, this is about helping our kids get ahead. Who of us wouldn't want this to be true? Who of us wouldn't want what's best for our children? So this moment we enter their storyline. If the person listening to us is nodding their heads vigorously, we go, yes, we've done it. We've nailed it. We've enter their storyline.
It kind of reminds me. I was just listening to a lecture given by a guy who'd read a whole bunch of. It was an English professor who'd read a whole bunch of cricket and other sporting biographies, and there's a whole sort of narrative that he says in there, which has to do with resilience, no regrets, boldness, courage. It's sort of self-justifying narrative of the success person, the person who's very successful, which tends to minimize luck, advantages that the person has naturally, but this sort of belief in the power of the will to achieve what it needs to, which is a kind of existential question, statement, which we're kind of imposing on our kids by taking them to sport. We want to participate in that. We want them to also believe in the power of positive thinking in that way.
Yeah, there's so many layers to children's sport when you unpack it.
My kids actually didn't really go to weekend sport, but that probably says a lot about me and the different storylines that I've instead taken up from culture. And there is this sort of multiplicity of storylines, isn't there? So how can Christians become better, I guess, cultural exegetes of the different storylines that there are?
Yeah, so we've all got trained, if we went to Bible college, how to exegete the Bible. We got given tools like grammatico-historical exegesis. This is where I've learned so much from Kevin Van Hooser, and an entry-level book would be his opening chapter in Everyday Theology. How do we exegete culture? Like, what tools do we use? And I think Kevin helps by saying every culture has a worldview. So sorry to pull that card back out of the pocket, where they believe certain things to be true, good, beautiful, I would add valuable, wise, and real to those things. And these worldviews, importantly, don't exist in a vacuum in abstract. They exist in the concrete by producing cultural texts. And by text, we don't mean just written words, but, anything is a text, like fashion, architecture, gardens, food, music, movies. So these texts express the cultural storyline. There's a very implied cultural storyline. And these texts, in turn, come back and shape our worldview. But the worldview also gives us the lenses by which we interpret the cultural text. So it's this back and forth dialogical relationship between worldview and the worlds of text that we produce. And as Christians, then, we become sensitive to text and we start listening to what our friends say. So I'll give you an example. I was once in an Uber ride, and my driver was from, I think, Nepal. And then I see a motorbike pass us, and I asked him, "Did you ever ride a motorbike?" And he said, "Yes, of course I used to ride a motorbike." And then I asked him, "What did you want to get why don't you ride a motorbike now?" And he was so insulted by the question. He said, "Because I have a car now." And I suddenly realized the same text, a motorbike, has a different meaning for someone from South Asia versus someone from a Western culture. And then we have different lenses. So in the Western culture, a motorbike is a fashion accessory. We buy it after we buy the car, and it expresses our individualism, because you can only fit one person on a motorbike, and it's a symbol of freedom. But for someone in, say, a South Asian culture, you begin with a bicycle, you aspire to a motorbike, and you aspire to a car. The car means you made it. So then to get a motorbike is a backward step. You've gone backwards. And so these guys freak out, the South Asians, when they see in Australia, we drive cars with a bicycle on the roof rack. Like, we're giving the bicycle a ride to the place we're going to ride the bicycle in. So it's an inversion of values for them. But again, just realizing, okay, just be more sensitive to texts and how different people interpret these texts. And from there, we can work out what gives people, what they see as value, true, real, and what their implied cultural storyline, what's the happy ever after ending they're looking for.
I was going to say, Australians really value, we love authenticity. We really don't like moralizing, though, of course, we probably do a lot of moralizing. And it's one of the kind of, we don't like when others do it to us. But how can we communicate, particularly gospel, and also a vision of the good without sounding preachy and defensive? Because that sounds like sort of old, Christendom thinking to post-Christians, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So if in Christendom the question was, how can I get to heaven? And the answer was by being a good person. In post-Christendom, I think the question is, how can I be happy And the answer is by being authentic. And so really authenticity is the high virtue right now in post-Christendom. And I think, again, enter the storyline and say, who of us doesn't want to be authentic? This is a good thing. Like, we don't want to be false. We don't want to be fake. We do want to be authentic. And this is where, with cultural apologetics, once we've entered the storyline, earned social capital, earned social trust, earned the right now to speak into a storyline, we could deconstruct it by saying, but what is authenticity? So I love that Monty Python skit in Life of Brian where one person says, I'm an individual, and they all yell out, we're all individuals. And if we've been given a storyline where we're meant to be authentic, and I'm authentic, yeah, I'm authentic. Well, how authentic are we? Are we just doing what we're told again? So maybe we're not as authentic as we think we are. So that's one way we could deconstruct that. And not all forms of authenticity are equal either. So it's amazing. As Australians, we've championed freedom. And in the West for the last few hundred years, freedom is the highest ideal. It's in all our national anthems. I think I've looked it up. I think it's in Canada's national anthem, the USA's national anthem, Australia's national anthem. Not the UK's, because they're still ruled by monarchs, so they're still waiting for their freedom, right? But somehow freedom is the highest ideal, but not all forms of freedom are equal. So it's interesting, for the last decade, we gave our children unchecked freedoms to use screens and devices, and now realize that freedom has enslaved them to the point now where every Western country is thinking we need to reverse those freedoms. Sometimes boundaries set you free. And so using that as an analogy, maybe we've lived a lifestyle where we thought we were free, we thought we were authentic, but maybe we've just been doing what we've been told. We've been living a common storyline. We're not as authentic as we think we are. And maybe these freedoms have owned us and trapped us rather than truly liberated us.
I notice from a theological point of view, your approach, you do point to the good in culture. Like you're saying, find the good thing, the thing that resonates with the gospel vision. That's interesting, because some people might say culture is sinful. You know, that really a sort of there's an antithesis between culture out there and the Christian worldview in here. But you're not buying into that at all. Is that fair enough?
Yeah. So the short answer is yes, I'm not buying into it. The longer, more nuanced answer is, in Reformed theology, they talk about total depravity, but that doesn't mean everything's totally depraved. It just means everything is somehow touched by sin. And so there's no aspect of culture, no aspect of us that's not touched by sin. That's what it means. But it doesn't mean we're totally depraved. So theologically, thinking because of God's general revelation, all truth is God's truth. Because of God's common grace, all goodness is God's goodness. We could also say because of the image of God, there's something divine in every human. And we could say because of, depending on the way we interpret Ecclesiastes 3, where our hearts cry eternity, we all have a legitimate God-given existential cry for the transcendent. So somehow in every culture, no matter how foreign to the gospel, there will be truth, goodness, beauty, and let's say wisdom and something real that we can latch onto. There'll be a buttoning on point. This is, for the theological nerds, this is the Bart Brunner debate, isn't it? Where is there anything common that a Christian can latch onto? Maybe even to take it further, the problem with a worldview approach used to be we used to learn in chapter 1, this is the Christian worldview, and in all of the other chapters were the non-Christian worldviews. Call them what they were, consumerism, individualism, whatever. But now realize every Christian lives inside a culture. There's no truly neutral, amorphous Christian worldview that's out there. The gospel exists within cultural storylines.
I'm starting to think we might need to do an episode on worldview. What do you think, Michael?
Oh, I'd love to do that, of course. Yeah,
but,
worldview or not worldview, yeah.
Yes, but great to have you with us, Sam, and tell us the name of the book again so people can go out and find it.
Yeah. It's The Gospel After Christendom. And dude, the list of authors here is like the who's who right now, the post-Christendom evangelical world. I'm just the water boy. I'm carrying the sponge for these people. Is Joshua Chatraw, James Eglinton, Rachel Gilson, Rebecca McLaughlin, Alan Noble, goes on and on and on and on. Christopher Watkins, so we'll claim him. He's like an Aussie. We'll claim him. And then there's like 5 others, but we're running out of time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We didn't even have to get him to play the recorder with his nose.
You guys are amazing. I don't know how you strung out 20 minutes of content from me. Like,
thanks for joining us.
Sam. Well, Sam Chan has got us up to speed about cultural apologetics, but this made Michael and I wonder, is this what we do? And then in Through the Wardrobe, we aren't apologetic about how much we like this particular author. For argument's sake, where we take a debate, cut out the party politics and try to talk it out. There is actually some debate out there, Michael, about what you and I are doing on this podcast.
Oh, it's gone around the world. It's
what are we on about? What are we doing? And I think it's engendered, I think let's be fair to say, it's engendered much conversation between us in the 7 years we've been doing the podcast together. What are we doing? What are we achieving?
Yeah, it's not, by the way, it's not, what are we doing? But sometimes. But anyway, go on.
And one suggestion made to us by a few people is that what we're doing is engaging in cultural apologetics. After all, when people ask us, what do you discuss? Well, certainly I usually say something like theology and culture. Does that equate to cultural apologetics? So what do we think we're doing? And perhaps more significantly, what do we think about cultural apologetics? So, Michael, let's start with, do you think we are doing cultural apologetics?
Well, I think we need a definition in order to know what we're doing. But I do. I mean, my definition really is that it's similar to the book that Sam's spoken about and contributed to, that when you talk about commending the gospel of Jesus Christ, you can there's the truth, there's goodness, and there's beauty. And cultural apologetics tends to the goodness and beauty, the sort of desiring part and the collective part of human consciousness, of human awareness. And I think that's, in one sense, the space in which we are sitting, because although we do issues of truth, we also, in one sense, it's the process of showing that you can have a good conversation, a gracious conversation, which I feel like is a lack or a desire that people have. They, not just within the Christian world, but in the world in general, there's a sense in which the civil conversation has been lost. And so recapturing civil discourse would be an amazing, how could you do that? On what grounds, what would give you the basis for doing that? And so in doing that, I hope we're doing a kind of cultural apologetic where we show you can disagree, think hard about things, but do it in a respectful and interesting way.
So interesting, because I don't think of what I'm doing with you as cultural apologetics.
So you'd led me up the garden path.
Well, it just shows I'm not even sure what he's going to say here. We're going to say something different. I can see why people think we are doing cultural apologetics, and it probably does come down somewhat to a definition. And, Sam already said to us, look, there are, many different definitions from even the Keller Center contributors to their volume. When I was looking at the definition, so the guy that wrote the 2019 book, Paul Gould, defined cultural apologetics as the work of establishing the Christian voice, conscience and imagination within a culture so that Christianity is seen as true and satisfying. I do think probably what gets me about that is it comes from what to me looks a bit lacking in humility as a posture. Do you know what I'm saying?
Don't say it again. As in, there's an over againstness, as in we know how to show.
Yeah, and also it says establishing the Christian voice. And I think one of the things that you and I are doing is establishing the multiplicity of Christian voice.
Oh, I know. It's so annoying.
But also it's sort of quite unidirectional. Do you know what I mean? Like it's sort of we are doing this to the culture.
Yeah, according to that definition.
According to that definition. One that kind of was a bit more what I would say we're doing. It's Dr. Hannah Ordway. She said, cultural apologetics as the approach to defending the truth of the Christian faith that involves engagement with all aspects of our culture, from literature, the arts, the media, film, all the way into the political realm, to economics, to science, and the way we understand those kinds of questions. The question's how we can present the truth in such a way as understandable, in such a way it can be lived out in every aspects of our lives and not compartmentalized. So cultural apologetics tries to do that and do that in every sphere of activity. And I think that perhaps is closer to what we're doing, in that I would think what we're doing is cultural engagement.
Well, we do some cultural engagement, but I want to kind of pull back to the meta and say, this is entirely meta conversation because we're talking about how we're talking, et cetera, et cetera. So please indulge us. But I think one of the key one of the pillars of cultural apologetics is actually the Christian community. It's one of the insights of the book and of this whole cultural apologetics move is actually in the New Testament. It's so strong that the way the Christian movement operates internally, not that it's perfect, but that it deals with its conflicts in particular ways, is part of its communication of what the gospel is. So this is how, to quote Jesus, this is how they'll know you my disciples, if you love one another.
Good quote, because what I want to say, the more that I thought about it, because I would have said straight up it's cultural engagement, the more I thought about it, I thought we are doing cultural discipleship.
Oh. Okay, all right, go on, discipleship.
And so even when you think there you go. So even when you think of the mission of Jesus, he said, go make disciples. And I think that encapsulates both, say, an apologetics approach, but also that we are talking into the Christian community and saying, how can you be good disciples? And it's as people are good disciples that they have a real impact on culture.
Yes. And I think Sam in particular would say exactly the same. And I think he in particular in his work wants to make sure that this isn't just an abstract thing. This is something that the Christian communities can do and ought to do, so that because one of the dangers with apologetics, as it used to be known, was it was a very ivory tower sort of exercise. It was sort of it was really intellectualized, and so but this is actually a lived kind of. It's discipleship for the sake of. For the sake of the gospel. So that can be done and ought to be done by Christian communities everywhere.
Well, the interesting thing was, so you and I both, I don't think there was any collusion, but both of us recently spoke to a group of defense chaplains, right?
Yes.
Different groups, but both of us got asked by different groups.
We did.
To talk to them. And the reason why the person who asked me said, this is why I'm asking you, is she said, because you both engage with culture and actually in sort of a post-Christian environment, we need to learn how to do that. We're not good at that, but that's our connection points in. So I think, we're doing something that helps people connect in, but it is part of their discipleship. You need to understand the culture you need to be able to interact with it.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily coming from a top-down unilateral, like it's engagement.
Yeah. Once again, I think Sam is a fantastic model of this. Is that some people think when they hear that, by the way, they think, oh, my goodness, to be an ordinary Christian, you mean I have to read all this abstract sociology stuff? No. You're doing cultural engagement and cultural analysis all the time. All the time. We can help
watching
people.
The Bachelor,
which
I don't, I don't watch, I should say, but
I don't watch. Yeah, but yes, you are doing that, picking the kids up from school, or whatever it might be. You are doing that. So we can do this at a number of different levels, and so we shouldn't be intimidated by sophisticated language about this. This is something every Christian can be called into doing in the everyday.
And probably what I would be maybe resistant to the term cultural apologetics is sometimes, and I've seen some really good examples of it, but sometimes the examples of what comes under that name, I would actually say this is more like a culture war, right? And I did actually an article a couple of years or so back for an academic journal, so it's very self-referential, about our practice and comparing it to other evangelicals who are engaging with culture. And basically say, like, a very common evangelical way of approaching culture is to kind of go, let's go see what's bad that we should avoid.
Yes, there's swearing in that
and
movie.
Judge it. Like, we're going to judge this movie, or it's too feminist. I've often liked those ones, But in reality, I think you and I come with much more of a curious posture of we're not kind of seeking to put something in the framework of how evangelical is this movie, because obviously if it's not made by evangelical, it's probably not.
A friend of mine used to talk about finding surprising friends. That is because all truth is God's truth. There will be people speaking truth, saying true things or identifying truly beautiful things. even in the broken and fallen world, even if they're not necessarily Christian. And so you can kind of there's connections to be made. And so cultural apologetics, I think, invites both affirmation but also critique, but not just affirmation and not just critique, because both of those are kind of are deeply problematic. But
and
the gospel enables
actually,
us to do that.
And I think that's also about, and I think part of being a disciple is to live as a transformed human, but as a human in your world. Like you're not a different species from the other people in the world. So you all are grappling with the same things. And you all, you can actually talk to each other about those common struggles and common longings. And the texts that cultures produce are important because it shows a community of people who are struggling and thinking about things together. You're not going to agree with all of it, but it's a really important part of the discussion, the longings, the values, the thinking through of when any society.
Yeah, and that's again, you don't have to make that too highbrow. That's what you say at the coffee shop when you just read the newspaper, or when the budget's been handed down, or when war is declared, or when COVID comes in, or a bushfire. It's all there. Again, when we find out what our aspirations for our children are, those are all. They're universal. They're human universals, and so we don't need to deny that we as Christians don't necessarily have the answers to all of those either. That's what I really like about this idea of cultural apologetics. Is it's not simply speaking, but it's also listening.
That's, I think, sometimes depending on the definition.
Too.
Like, is it listening as well? And I think that's why I kind of would myself go for. Apologetics, if done well, is also listening. It's just that quite often it's not done well, I suppose. But I actually would kind of frame it a bit more relationally, like to go, it's actually engagement with what the community, what the people around us are doing and saying and being, and we're part of that community and we want to be engaged with it and talking into it and listening and so on. And so it's being relational.
In a resonant way to the actual experience. I'm haunted by a phrase that Catherine, my wife's cousin's husband, once said. He's English, right? And he used to say, "Oh, it's a load of vicar waffle." What he means is sometimes Christians just talk a lot of cobblers as far as anyone else can. We just talk babble. And this is saying, no, we need to talk now. We can learn to talk. The gospel already helps us to talk the language of anyone. And we need to do that act of translation in a way.
Yeah, the act of translation is so important. Like just today I was talking in a Bible study at church and we were talking about sin. And, something I've heard said many times to me is, our culture doesn't like the word sin, or it doesn't understand sin anymore. And I said, actually, I don't think that's true. I think our culture does understand that things are wrong, that things are evil, that there's injustices. I think our culture actually has a strong sense of that. We might not agree with every instance that the culture does, but actually, if you stop using the word sin, you do have a major point of connection there of going, yeah, I don't think that should have happened to that group of people. Or, yes, we all really care and think children are really vulnerable. Like, that is actually talking about sin.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, no, totally it is. Totally
Yeah,
is. I think the word sin has become sort of domesticated and become a tabby cat when it should be a tiger. But I wondered if we might conclude by asking the question, why is cultural apologetics having a moment, do you think? Because it's a new word. I think, of course, it's been done for ages.
I do think you get this, and I think it happens in general culture and in any particular subcultures. It happens in Christian culture. You get people who go, this is the new thing and this is going to save us all, right? And I don't remember, both of us are probably old enough to remember when missional was the word.
Yeah.
So everything was missional, and it wasn't a bad thing.
I remember the emerging church. Yeah, exactly. And I think what we did was we incorporated it, or we didn't, but it went through all our processes and our thinking. And really we kind of went, well, yeah, it was a good new way of approaching, but really it was just mission, right? Yeah, it was.
So I think there's a bit of that this is kind of just a pointing us, because we're people are going, oh, what do we do? We're in a post-Christian society, and having to rethink, you know what, we can't just assume that the culture around us knows everything that we're talking about, is the same as us, and how does that mean we're going to approach culture? So I really think it's just coming out of our moment. But in a sense, it's not really going to be the thing that changes the whole world. I think in like 10 years' time, it'll just be part of what we talk about.
Yeah,
when
because
we
I think
talk
it was
about
I
culture
think it's
and
just a new
apologetics.
word for a thing that people have been doing. Lethally Newbigin is a great example, and C.S. Lewis are great examples of people just in our, and of course Augustine does cultural apologetics. You'd have to say all the way back. So it's been done for millennia. But I would say, I think you're right, the post-Christian moment where you can't just give the evangelistic talk you gave in the 1980s. It just doesn't, it's meaningless. It doesn't really land with anyone. Not with anyone, but doesn't really land with many people because then their existential problem isn't the same, or they don't feel it is, so they don't understand that. I would also say, I think in the wider culture, there's been an understanding that rational truth is not the only, or logical truth is not the only truth. So I think the interesting debate between, say, the scientists, Richard Dawkins, and then sort of more postmodern groups is a very interesting little clash, because you realize that there, in the secular world, there's more than one way of thinking about what might be true. And I think Christians have worked out, oh, right, well, it's actually there are different understandings of what a human being is, or what meaning itself actually is. And that's both an opportunity but also a challenge.
I think for me, what ultimately will happen in like 10 years' time, hopefully we've worked through some of the cultural war impulses that are coming out through it, and instead have learnt more how do we equip people to be cultural exegetes and to be disciples within their culture.
We might even be winsome. Still to come, we tend to think of cultural engagement as responding to the latest Hollywood film. But what about texts a bit older than that, and particularly texts that are still read today? Well, next we engage with an author who has just turned 250. Through the Wardrobe, Finding Truth Through Story. Well, Jane Austen is one of the most celebrated novelists in the English language. And in December just past, it was 250 years since her birth, and she's looking great. She lived, I've actually been to her grave in Winchester Cathedral.
Oh, have you?
Yeah, she's there. And rightly so. It's great to see her there. I mean, that she's got a place. Not great to see her dead, you know what I mean? This didn't go the way I thought. She lived.
Keep going.
Jane lived from the late 18th century into the early 19th century and died at the age of just 41. She's known for primarily for 6 finished novels. The most famous is
Pride and Prejudice.
Pride and Prejudice, but you know, there was Emma and Sense and Sensibility and the others too. And she was a popular success in her own time. Her work remains popular today, earns academic attention and respect, but is constantly adapted into film and TV. Every generation has a new version, a new mini-series of the various novels. And she seems to be adored by people of very different stripes would agree about little else. There was a BBC Open University doco made to celebrate her 250th birthday called Jane Austen, Rise of Genius. It shows in Australia on ABC iView, and this clip from its intro highlights her impact and the way people think about her.
Jane Austen was a writer teeming with new ideas who revealed profound truths about the world she lived in.
There is writing before Austen and there is writing after Austen. That achievement is enormous.
Jane Austen is the greatest comic novelist we have ever produced.
At a time when women were supposed to know their place, Jane ripped up the rulebook.
She's not just writing about romance. We should see her as a political novelist.
She's telling young women, I see you and I hear you, which I think is such a modern thing.
Now, we often think of cultural engagement as being with contemporary cultural texts, but engagement with the canon, what we might say is the treasured texts of our culture, well, that can also be significant too. I mean, when did you first encounter Jane?
Jane Austen. I'm going to do a shout out now to my cousin who's a Christian school principal, Rebecca Hall.
With Christian principles.
Yeah, she's 2 years older than me. And when I was in 6th grade, she said to me, Megan, you have to read Pride and Prejudice. So I went off to my dad, who used to be an English teacher before he became a minister in academic, and said, give me Pride and Prejudice. And he went, okay. So that was it. And it was a very impactful first reading, like one of the first sort of classics of adult literature that I read. And I remember, the twists in the story completely took me by surprise. At the age of 11.
You didn't know that Wickham was a baddie.
Yeah, that's right. All of that. You never get that first sort of impression of Pride and Prejudice ever again. But I've been a Janeite, a fan of Austen ever since then I was 11. So what about yourself?
Well, we read Jane Austen in year 11 and in year 12. So I think we read Emma in year 11 and Pride and Prejudice in year 12, or maybe the other way around. I think it was Pride and Prejudice was on the HSC at my boys' school. So I'm very pleased to say. And then as an English teacher, I actually had to teach both of those texts, again, at a boys' school. So that was very interesting. I remember going to my head of department and saying, how am I going to get these boys interested in Pride and Prejudice? And it was a very clever maths. They were the top class because of their maths scores, not because of the English scores. Right. And she said, oh, well, which one of the 5 girls would you take on a date? The answer was very disappointing to most of my female friends.
The sisters in Pride and Prejudice.
Yes. Which of the sisters in Pride and Prejudice? They all said Kitty and Lydia. So I'm very sorry to pass that on.
That could be an age thing though. Yeah.
But it's funny. I mean, that's the thing. I remember talking to a colleague, a male colleague. He was a science teacher. He was reading Emma on the train and just sitting there. He said, I kept laughing out loud at her irony, her the way she put things. And so, she's extraordinary. It's extraordinary that you would still do this, especially as it's so domestic, so
it's kind of domestic,
so confined in a way.
And yet there's sort of, it's not that the outside world doesn't impinge on it. And you get to see, I think, the fact that she had something like 5 or 6 brothers or something. And they're all like, they're clergymen and one runs a bank and they're naval officers and things. So she probably has a lot more knowledge of the bigger world than you might realise. And they're all writing letters to each other, although most of her letters were destroyed by her sister. So you wonder what was in those.
Yeah, we'll have to find those.
Because she could be very sharp-witted. What's really intriguing in terms of the this episode and Jane Austen for me is that I do feel like evangelicals approach like a time-honoured text like that in quite a different way from the way that they would approach a modern text. Well, what's really interesting about Jane Austen is she was the popular big book bestsellers of her time. Like Pride and Prejudice and Emma, for instance, did great guns.
Oh, and people thought of novels, and that actually features in one of her novels.
Yes.
They thought of novels as being sort of very distracting. It's like the doom scrolling of today, sort of wastes your time. It's a kind of...
And sort of, bad for the minds of young women.
Yes.
And yes, she, like, say, Northanger Abbey, she sort of deals with that in a really clever satire of
but it
Gothic literature.
There's not a lot of salacious content. I mean, it's referred to... I
feel like there is, if you think of the time.
But not a lot of sex scenes.
No, but no one did have sex scenes in that. But what happens, say, for instance, in Pride and Prejudice with Lydia and so on, there are, and with Darcy's own sister, that actually is quite strong adult themes, right?
Adult themes, yeah. Not much drug use, though.
But, so, like, if you were at that time, and I think that part of that, what you're showing there is that cultural distance in that what was, say, maybe daring at one time is not daring at another time. So you get that.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is too that, so far away, we kind of can divorce it from itself as a cultural text, and then we kind of read on whatever we want to it. Like what really intrigued me is I went looking at like who really likes Jane Austen. You remember we did the episode like in our last season about Doug Wilson, who's like the biblical patriarchy.
Oh, he loves Jane Austen.
He loves Jane Austen. And I'm like thinking, I don't think Jane Austen would have liked you. I don't know. Because she had quite a lot to say about the situation of women in her time. Like it's quite strong what she says about women. Like I recently used Jane Austen, like Pride and Prejudice. I started a sermon with the first line from Pride and Prejudice, which is a truth universally acknowledged.
Yes.
That, a rich man would be in need of a wife.
No,
Of course, it's deeply
exactly.
ironic, right?
Yes.
Because, of course, in fact, it's women who desperately need a husband in that culture.
Yeah. It's the voices. It's the voices of the women talking to one another, isn't it? He
Yeah,
must
yeah.
be, in what,
Yeah,
and of what they're thinking about.
And it's going to make huge, impact on their security, on the rest of their lives, and so on. And a lot of what she's doing is talking about that situation in their culture for women. So the sermon I was doing, if anyone's interested, was on the woman at the well. Yeah, because it's about the fact that this woman, I think, went from husband to husband because actually that was the way that you were provided for.
Yes. There's certainly really strong in sense and sensibility as well. This is like the unfulfilled question, the unfulfilled desire here is what's going to happen to me? Where am I going to land in terms of my marriage? And financial security is tied to this. And Jane is so practical about finances as well.
And she, of course, accepts.
She remains single.
She remains single. She accepts a marriage proposal and then thinks better of it overnight and remains single. But to her cost, like until she could get she actually became popular and started making some money. She was in a very desperate state. She was very reliant on her brothers after her father died and on their generosity such as it was.
Interestingly, as a Christian, you don't see a lot of open discussion of Christian themes. There are of course, three virtuous clergy and 2 rotters in the Austin oeuvre.
Yes, Mr. Collins and Mr. Elton are awful.
Yes.
But then Edmund in Mansfield Park, which is perhaps her most serious and political work.
Yes.
He obviously is shown as having a major vocation.
So we're not all bad, we male clergy. We're not all bad, we Anglican clergy.
Yes.
But I think interestingly, there's a moral sense which is drawn out of Christian sense of virtue, but also that you can learn and you can change your mind and repent. So Pride and Prejudice is all about your, actually refining your, putting down your pride and changing your mind about someone, being wrong about someone and actually reviewing it that's a very interesting kind of pattern of learning in a character, isn't it?
I mean, do we know whether she was just a sort of social, cultural Christian or a real Christian? Ultimately, we can't answer that. We do know she wrote prayers.
She's buried in a cathedral.
Well, she wrote prayers and she was a clergyman's daughter. So I suspect she probably was a Christian. And she did actually talk about evangelicals twice.
Yes.
In her letters.
Ah.
Yes, one of them positive.
Yes, one of them not so much.
And one of them negative. The negative one is earlier, but the positive one, really interesting. She kind of basically says, I'm really starting to think maybe we should all be evangelicals. And I think why she was saying that in that instance was because of authentic faith.
Right.
Which is authenticity is a big Jane Austen theme,
it really
right?
is, yeah.
Because the clergymen she doesn't like are careerists.
So, well, that's right. They're just grasping.
Yeah.
Now here's the question though. Like, have we done some cultural apologetics here? How have we helped Christian discipleship in talking about Jane Austen? What does Jane give us? What does she help us to see?
Well, I think yes, we've probably done some cultural apologetics. And I want to say we've done more than that. We've just engaged with a text that we really love.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've actually done. I've done some, what's the word? Critique of cultural apologetics itself, as in are we approaching texts from different ages in a different way, like or are we seeking to engage with texts in all their historicity and I suppose specificity of when they are, which actually would help with our reading of the Bible as well.
Yeah, and so we've got to be careful not to make her into a sort of conservative or a feminist ahead of her time. She's radical if she's radical in her own time. Like she's speaking into her own time.
Well, interestingly enough, stop me from going down a rabbit hole too much. We should wind this up in a second.
That train
but
has left the
Mansfield
station.
Park, and in the BBC doco, it really brings this out, was perhaps the most political and most you really get a vision of what it's like to be in poverty and that kind of thing. And it's her least successful book at the time. And she doesn't ever write another book like that. And she actually kind of impoverishes herself because she's so proud of Mansfield Park. She pays for another printing of it and has to be pulped.
Well, it's just too preachy. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think she went, you know what? I cannot afford to be too upfront. I'll have to get it in more sneakily. So that's things to
a bit more sneaky. Now, I think we should wrap up here.
Yes,
we should say, worth reading them again, worth picking up those novels from the shelf, blowing the dust off them if you haven't read them for a while, or if you've never read them
at all.
read them. So I just read Sense and Sensibility for the first time. I've read the other ones.
Oh, had you not read it before?
On my holiday. No, I hadn't read Sense and Sensibility, and
well, I'm
really
glad you made up that deficit.
Just enjoyed it a lot. So so I can commend those novels.
And I'm going to put a plug in for Mansfield Park because actually is my favourite. Well, thanks for being part of With All Due Respect. Coming up next episode. As a clueless Baptist, I didn't know about the thing called ordinary time until well into adulthood. The term sounds so, well, mundane that in its very mundanity, I've actually been intrigued by it ever since.
Well, I'm a clueless evangelical Anglican, so really I've come to it later too. But Professor Amy Peeler is going to join us to discuss ordinary time. And she's got a new book on that particular theme. And we're also thinking about how the ordinary might just be sacred. So join us next time. Bye for now.
See you then.
With All Due Respect is hosted by Megan Powder-Tois and by me, Michael Jensen. It's produced by the lovely Derek Yao. The editing has been done by Alec Green and Graciela Artifion. With All Due Respect is part of the Hope Media Network. We're delighted to say it's on Radio 103.2, so go to hope103.2.com.au and click onto our Facebook page to join in the debates with All Due Respect.